Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah McDougall, Director of Scholarship at Ben-Uri. A very warm welcome. Our current exhibition, Cosmopolis, The Impact of Refugee Art Dealers in London, curated by Helena Cuss, is open every Wednesday to Friday until 6th of September. So do please join us if you haven't done already. Thank you also for joining for tonight's talk. And just a reminder that we are recording, so cameras and microphones should be kept off, please. But do use the chat function to type in any questions, which we'll offer to Kai at the end. Also, just a note that if you'd like captions, you can do that by going to the option of More at the bottom of your screen with the 3 dots and pressing the captions part there. So I'm delighted to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Kai Lyons, whose doctoral research examined the peripatetic career of the Anglo-Irish artist Mary Swansea in relation to networks of modern art and transnational avant-gardism, informed by feminist, post-colonial and queer theories. This evening, Kai is going to talk to us about Viennese refugee art dealer Leah Bondi Jaray and her promotion of transnational women artists, including Mary Swansea. And now over to you, Kai.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to share my screen, everyone. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that now. Start the presentation. So the title of my presentation today is A Flair for Catching Heterogeneous, Leah Bondi Jaray, St. George's Gallery and Transnational Women Artists. So A Flair for Catching Heterogeneous. This title comes from Maurice Collis, who is an art critic and a fascinating character in his own right, who wrote the following quote in his review of the St. George Gallery exhibition of French and English living artists in the winter of 1946. So as you can see on screen, the full quote. So the gallery has a flair for catching heterogeneous and has now brought in a painter called Swansea, a woman, it appears, who has long practiced her art in private. 3 of her paintings are shown, and if she has a studio full of works of the same quality, I sincerely hope that she will not hesitate to bring them out. So as Sarah introduced me with, Dublin-born Mary Swansea was the focus of my doctoral research. And in response to Collis's quote, yes, she did indeed have a studio full of paintings and sketches and artworks, but actually she did not work in private. She did a lot of exhibitions, so some of that I will sort of discuss a little bit later. So her 2 exhibitions at St. George's Gallery in 1946 and 1947 marked the end of her career outside of Ireland, even though she was based in London. So post 1947, she still exhibited, but it was only in the Republic of Ireland. And in the narrative of her career, these 2 exhibitions at St. George's Gallery are often viewed as evidence of her high standing amongst the established contemporary art scene in London and confirmed her belonging to the School of Paris. Now, evidently, this is not a paper on Mary Swansea. This is a paper on Leah Bondi Jaray and her impact on post-war painting in England and of an émigré art dealer supporting émigré artists. So during my talk today, I'm going to start by exploring Bondi Jaray and St. George's Gallery, and I'm going to move into some of the women who exhibited at the gallery. I want to think about and share maybe what these exhibitions can tell us about life as a woman artist, as an émigré woman artist in the 1940s, both as professional and as princess. There was a princess who exhibited, more on that later. I'm going to return to Swansea to think about the art dealer in the reflection of the artist that I know so well, thinking about absences and presences and invisible connections only made visible through overlapping of dates and time frames. So I'm going to close perhaps with maybe a little bit of a speculative turn, thinking about these absences and creating a space to ask questions and to think about the potential connections and encounters between all these women, and the support networks at play in the London art world. So I have started to put together a sort of chronology or chronicle of St. George's Gallery, which I'll share at the end of the presentation. And it paints a really fascinating picture of transnational, émigré, post-war artistic networks. Now, before I dive in fully, I do want to just kind of explore what I mean by transnational in this context. So I'm talking about cultural and artistic exchange that intentionally crosses national and cultural boundaries. So it's connected to notions of migration and circulation and exchange beyond or between centres. And this is very much the case with a lot of the women that I am going to be speaking about today. Obviously, Bondi Jaray, Fahrel-Nissa Zaid, Magdalena Rodulescu, Mary Krishna, and Mary Swansea. These were women whose professional careers in the arts were ones of migration and circulation and exchange from beyond and often between urban centres. So Istanbul, Bucharest, Berlin, Paris, Dublin, London. These are all locations of encounters and exchanges that informed and formed these careers. Moving back. There we go, come on. Yes, moving back to Bondi, Jaray. So as the recent email reminder from Ben-Uri about this talk asked, does the name of the art dealer, Leah Bondi Jaray, mean anything to you? And it's a very important question. As the email continues, Jaray's heirs were successfully represented by Howard Spiegler and Larry Kay in New York, winning restitution of Leah Bondi Jaray's portrait of Wally by Egan Schiele. This proved to be long, torturous, and ultimately a landmark in Nazi-looted art restitution precedents. And if you do a web search on Bondi Jaray, this case is one of the first items that pops up. As Bursu Dogromachi notes, her bitter dispute, the Bondi Jaray's bitter dispute over restitution after 1945, including her claims regarding the iconic painting Wally by Egan Schiele, which is on screen, has had a lasting impact on how the art dealer is perceived. She is usually only ever mentioned in this context. So, as noted, this landmark restitution case was resolved in 2010 and returned this painting to the Bondi Jaray family. So, following the annexation and the Aronization of Galerie Ruhl, owned by or under directorship of Bondi Jaray, Friedrich Welz, gallery owner himself, and a Nazi party member who was later investigated for his role in looting art from Jewish collections, visited Bondi Jaray in her home the day before she and her husband planned to escape for London. Schiele's portrait of Wally hung on the wall. Wells immediately recognised the value of the painting and demanded it. Bondi Jaray made it clear that it had been her private property for many years and that the picture neither belonged to Galerie Ruhl nor was it for sale. Wells insisted that he wanted the painting until Bondi Jaray's husband told her not to risk the planned escape. So according to court filings from that case, her husband told her she should not resist Wells because, quote, you know what he can do. But what I want to highlight is how this perception of Bondi Jaray is changing and her impact is coming ever more into focus. So Brave New Visions, which is available online, and Insiders, Outsiders, the book on the right-hand side of your screen, were both part of the Insiders, Outsiders year-long nationwide arts festival that celebrated the indelible contribution of refugees from Nazi-dominated Europe to British culture. And then there's also Dogromachi's Metro Mod project, which is a really interesting online resource, which marks out a unique and unconventional map of life and work in exile metropolises from the first half of the 20th century. So what's beginning to emerge now is that there is a lot more to Bondi Jaray's story than the restitution of this portrait. Born in Vienna as Leah Bondi into a German Jewish merchant family, she began working at Kunsthandlung Wörl in 1919. In 1924, she was appointed the managing director, and by 1926, she was the sole proprietor of the art dealership. So sort of that timeline kind of establishing that ambition and drive that will ultimately really come out in her work at St. George's Gallery. So under her leadership, this became Gallery Wörl, a gallery where contemporary artists could exhibit as well as sell their work. And this is how she met her husband, the sculptor Alexander Jaray. And after they married in 1936, she would often go by Leah Jaray or Leah Bondi Jaray. So throughout the session, throughout today's this evening's talk, I will just say Bondi Jaray. So I want to stress how pivotal Gallery Wörl was to the formation and impact of St. George's Gallery in London. Through Gallery Wörl, Bondi Jaray collaborated with some of the major art dealers of the 1920s. So Alfred Fleckheim in Dusseldorf, Paul Castrier in Berlin, and Daniel Henry Canwheeler in Paris, whose name you might be familiar with. Through her partnership with Fleckheim in particular, Bondi Jaray championed expressionist artists such as Schiele, Oskar Kokoschka, and Emil Nold, some of whom Bondi was later able to show and represent in London. Otto Brill, with whom she would open St. George's and who had shares in Gallery Wörl. And up until 1938, the gallery developed into a really popular meeting place for modern art in Vienna. Bondi Jaray herself was an avid collector, as evidenced by her having the portrait of a Wally by Egon Schiele. And she was also a board member of the Society for the Advancement of Modern Art in Vienna. So this drive and ambition to display and advance modern art would prove integral to St. George's Gallery. Indeed, I believe Gallery Wörl would be and was a blueprint for St. George's Gallery, utilizing in a similar way networks, collaborations, and similar ambitions. But as noted earlier, after the annexation of Austria in March 1938, Bondi Jaray was forced to flee to London, leaving behind her rich personal collection of artworks and the gallery itself. So she took over St. George's Gallery from its previous owner, Arthur Howell, in 1943 after the death of her husband, with the aforementioned Brill. St. George's Gallery was originally at 32A George Street, Hanover Square, with Arthur Howell, as it's stated previously, as its director. When it reopened in 1945, it was located on 81 Grosvenor Street. Brill, a manufacturer and art collector, was another victim of the annexation of Austria. He was arrested and his assets seized in 1938. He and his wife fled to London that September, and he managed to take with him a few works, mainly on paper, by Koschka and Schiele, among others. And it is likely that these works formed the foundation of some of the group exhibitions at St. George's Gallery, including its reopening exhibition. So you can see the full exhibition catalogue on screen. So although Bondi Jaray took over ownership in 1943, the first exhibition was on the 1st of March 1945 of paintings and watercolors by 20 masters. Now, masters, which included some expected names, which you might be able to pick out on screen: Paul Signac, Paul Cézanne, Auguste Renoir, Henri Matisse, Auguste Rodin, but it also included Marie Laurencin, the aforementioned Kokoschka, Raoul Dufay, Francis Hodgkins, Duncan Grant. And interestingly, Kokoschka's The Anschluss seems to be the only artwork with an explicit reference to the political and violent turbulence and the horrors of World War II. But what I want to focus on is how this reopening exhibition sets out Bondi Jaray's ambitions to display contemporary living artists alongside masters, to promote and advance contemporary modern art, and promote the work of émigré artists in post-war London. Of the artists included in this exhibition, the majority were living artists, alongside those key names like Cézanne and Rodin. The minority were from the British Isles. And the artworks had a very contemporary, modernist feel. So Bondi Jaray's commitment to contemporary living artists was noted at the time. In 1946, the year after its opening exhibition, Collis, he comes up again, wrote in The Observer that St. George's Gallery was a small establishment which has been steadily building up a name for discriminating taste and has already opened up an autumn exhibition of painting, several of its exhibitors being young artists of talent. One cannot but commend it for bringing forward these promising painters. Through her direction, the gallery also, through Bondi's direction, the gallery also became a vehicle to promote and display works by lesser known artists, as evident in Collis's review, some of whom made their first London appearance at St. George's Gallery. More significantly, and of more importance to this paper, St. George's Gallery was a platform for women artists in post-war London. And so this is a slide of some of the women that I have been able to pull up from the exhibition catalogues that I have had access to. So the ones that are highlighted in bold are the ones that had sort of solo exhibitions or joint solo exhibitions. There's quite a few of them, as you'll have noticed, exhibited multiple times. Although I will say the Frances Hodgkins exhibition in 1949 was posthumous. It was an homage to Hodgkins. So who were some of these women? I'm now going to take a little wander through some of them, particularly those who had their own solo shows, to kind of think about the context and to think about what these exhibitions, their lives and afterlives, and thinking about how they relate to Bondi Jaray. So I'm going to skip forward a few years to 1948 and the first solo exhibition of the artist, Princess Fahrelnisa Said. I did promise a princess. Said, a Turkish noblewoman by birth and Iraqi princess by marriage, was the first female artist to have a solo exhibition at London's prestigious Institute of Contemporary Arts. And my PDF has died, that's fine. One moment. So Said trained in both Paris and Istanbul, and she married Prince Zayed bin Hussein of Iraq in 1935, and he was appointed the first ambassador of the Kingdom of Iraq to Germany. So after the annexation of Austria in March 1938, comes up again, Prince Zayed and Fahrelnisa Zayed were recalled to Iraq. So Zayed spent the next few years traveling between Paris, Budapest, and Istanbul, again thinking about that crossing boundaries and borders, that transnational aspect. She was attempting to immerse herself in painting. By 1941, she was back in Istanbul, focused on her art career. So Zayed became involved in the Turkish avant-garde collection D Grubu, or Group D, in the early 1940s, an avant-garde group of painters working in the newly formed Turkish Republic. This was a male-dominated group, and as Adila Laidi Hanea noted in the monograph on screen, Zayed was often dismissed for being a, quote, woman, a society lady. However, participation in this group gave Zayed the confidence to host her first solo exhibition in her Istanbul flat in 1945, where she showcased her nudes, interiors, and urban vistas. The fact that this flat was also the meeting place for her prominent weekly salons is not only evidence of the social and intellectual milieu surrounding the artist, but it also demonstrates the integration of art into life that would continue throughout the rest of Zayed's life, underpinning her hope to, quote, annihilate the mother and the wife in favor of the artist. Although her association with the group was short-lived, working with Group D clearly gave Zayed the confidence to begin exhibiting on her own, which brings us back to St. George's Gallery. So after the war, Prince Zayed was appointed the first Iraqi ambassador to the court of St. James. So the family moved to London, where they would remain for many years, with Said converting one of the maids' rooms of the embassy into a studio, and she continued to paint. Her first London exhibition was at St. George's Gallery in 1947. Again, Collis noted that Said was an artist to be taken very seriously, and that her works have a matured technique of great virtuosity and beauty. What's interesting to note is the fact that the Queen Mother attended Said's exhibition at St. George's Gallery. And there is a photo of that somewhere. I've read multiple references to this photo of Said welcoming the Queen Mother to her solo exhibition. So what we can see in this example is how, St. George's Gallery has momentum, that this is a pivotal moment in this woman's career, that after this period from the 1950s onward was when Said's reputation really became, as an artist, became cemented. She was living between London and Paris and exhibiting extensively internationally. And what I want to note is a really interesting fact, that exactly a year later, Said's son from her first marriage, Nejad, had his own solo exhibition at St. George's Gallery. So now we start to see and unpick some of those invisible connections, making them a little more visible. Thinking or asking, I'm so curious, did Said introduce Bondi Jaray to her son? Did Said's son Nejad encourage his mother to speak to Bondi Jaray on his behalf? Fascinating to think about. I'm now going to move on to someone else to kind of showcase another aspect of St. George's Gallery, which is this really interesting technique or strategic ploy to combine solo and group exhibitions. So this is a self-portrait of Magdalena Radulescu. And in 1949, December 1949, she had a solo exhibition alongside some selected group paintings. So using sort of maybe the draw and promotional aspect of perhaps more established names, and then providing an opportunity for a lesser known woman artist to have her first solo exhibition in London. So Magdalena Radulescu was a Romanian painter born in 1902. And after the First World War, she settled in Bucharest, but pursued her art education in Munich and Paris. She made her professional debut in an exhibition in Bucharest in 1924, and her Parisian debut was in 1929 at the Salon des Indépendants. Her paintings were inspired by Romanian customs and traditions, folklore, local weddings, village parties, and a lot of her artworks are full of this swirling movement of dance, as you can see on screen. In 1946, she moved to Nice in France, and she mostly held exhibitions in Nice and in Paris, where she had made a name for herself. And again, really important to note that she also exhibited in London, and how important and key St. George's Gallery was in that. And I'm fascinated by another slightly invisible, made tangible connection. Her exhibition took place 6 months after her husband's solo exhibition. So Radulescu married the Italian artist Massimo Campigli in 1925. And the exhibition in the summer of 1949 was Campigli's first ever exhibition in England. Testament to Bondi Jaray's ambition for forwarding, advancing contemporary modern art. But I also want to highlight that this demonstrates that Bondi Jaray had access and utilized networks and connections incredibly effectively. I'm going to move backwards a little bit, and I'm going to move to 1946 and reintroduce Mary Swansea. So 18 months after the first reopening, or the reopening exhibition, 1st of March 1945, St. George's Gallery held another group exhibition, this one called New Selection of Works by French and English Living Artists. And there were 4 women who were included in that list. So Eileen Agar, British Argentinian artist who was well established at this stage. But what's really important is that this exhibition marked her return to an increased productivity post-war. So this was a really important platform for her to re-enter the art scene post-war, as she had been very inactive during that period. Suzanne Roger is a French artist, and she's often overshadowed by her husband, André Baudin, who, interestingly, also had a solo exhibition the following year in St. George's Gallery. So again, those connections between family members, thinking about how that might have come about. So again, we see those personal and private connections, the invisible force that is networking, that we all engage with in our workplaces, supporting the development of a rich transnational exhibition program. We have Constance Widden. I know very little about her. I think she's American. I know that she married the American artist George Ortman. She's known as Connie Ortman, Connie Widden. And of course, Mary Swansea, although she was misspelt as Swansea with an S in the catalogue. As mentioned in my introduction, Swansea was the focus, or as mentioned by Sarah, Swansea was the focus of my doctoral research. And consequently, I know much more about her professional career than Bondi Jaray's, or any other of the fascinating women who have cropped up so far today. But I believe this knowledge can help to excavate the importance of Bondi Jaray, the art dealer reflected through the mirror of the artist that I know so well. So in the narrative, as I've mentioned in the beginning, in the narrative of Swansea's career, her exhibitions at St. George's Gallery are viewed as evidence of her high standing, being part of the School of Paris. And actually, consequently, Bondi Jaray has had a really lingering impact on the perception of Swansea's career in Ireland, in her presence, or the artist's presence, in Irish art history. And yet the art dealer, Bondi Jaray, this woman, is absent from this history. And in that context, when I first found out about this connection, I began to wonder what Bondi Jaray might have thought about Swansea's artworks and how these two exhibitions came about, where Swansea's artworks in the group show of 1946 well received enough to prompt the solo show a few months later. Evidently, the quote from Maurice Collis seems to support this. This was one of the paintings exhibited in 1946, emblematic of Swansea's later style. One of the reviews calls her work Dickensian, interested in social norms and connections and relationships. This is a very interesting painting where the yellow is highlighting the female figure, and the male looks like a very interesting face. So Swansea's exhibitions at St. George's Gallery have shaped or helped shape the lasting perception and understanding of Swansea as an artist in Ireland, especially in Ireland. So exhibition reviews are one of the most preliminary elements in canon formation, and they often make heavy use of patrilineage, so connecting to men, to offer context, validation, and to legitimize. So, critics and dealers may prefer to legitimate women artists whose very real self-referencing to male artists makes it possible for them to be inserted and then resubsumed into the patriarchy. Quote from Mira Shore. So the 1946 exhibition at St. George's Gallery included well-known names such as Braque, Vlaminck, Dufy, Chagall, Henry Moore, and William Scott, names that are perhaps more familiar than those of the women discussed today. And I think, one might wonder why, one might speculate as to why. So the 1946 catalogue, which you saw on screen, was part of a large gift of archival material given to the National Gallery of Ireland in 2018. Up until that point, an up until the catalogue was actually digitized in around 2023, the catalogue could not be sourced. I could not find it for love nor money. And neither could anyone else. So consequently, Swansea's biographer, Liz Cullinan, noted that the only woman in the established and contemporary company indicates her high standing among the British European artists. Now, as is evidence, the catalogue has been digitized, and Swansea was not the only woman artist. She was the main woman mentioned in that review by Collis, but there were 3 other women who exhibited alongside her. And this is sort of hinting at getting to that legacy of the exhibition in Swansea's history. And interestingly then, Swansea had a twin solo show a few months later with the artist Mary Krishna. So Mary Krishna is a fascinating figure as both writer and artist. Born Mary Oldfield, she met her husband, Roop Krishna, at the Royal College of Art in the late 1920s. They moved to India and married in Lahore in 1936, what was then Lahore in 1936. While in India, the couple published poetry and prose in 2 publications. Art and Life in 1940, and Echo and Ego in 1943. The second of these I have had the pleasure to read. It is at the National Art Library at the V&A. So the first half of Echo and Ego is written by Krishna, and the second half by her husband. So she details in this one particular piece of prose her views on art, and a particular line reading, "The art, pure form, colour, rhythm, see they not, nor do thrill to behold, the emotion subjective, and still which ones in works of art." I don't quite know what it means, but it sounds good. And there's another, or an Irish connection that comes up. So maybe it was a good idea to pair Swansea and Krishna together. Maybe Bondi Jaray knew what was what. Maybe she read this. I don't know. Again, these are some of these really interesting things to think about. So later on in this book from 1943, in a piece entitled James Joyce, the Literary Rebel, she writes, Krishna writes, "Joyce is a literary rebel.
Works.
So somebody is unmuted. If they could mute themselves, that would be lovely. So going to the quote on screen, "Joyce is a literary rebel who breaks to freedom from existing traditional ties and formalities, literary and artistic. Finnegan's Wake is one of the most important artistic productions of the 20th century because it is an expression, a bold and powerful expression of the revolutionary and creative tendencies of the century, wherein radical changes, artistic, social, and political, are taking place and reshaping the entire structure of our civilization." Pretty powerful paragraph. So plates of her work are included in this publication. So excuse the glare on this as I was taking a photo. So it is unclear whether or not this work was included in the joint exhibition with Mary Swansea, but kind of thinking back to the Happy Couple painting, there does seem to be some aesthetic similarities, that sort of social commentary, very, I suppose, topical as well in the period post-World War II. So the Krishnas returned to London in 1946, and a year later, she had her first exhibition at St. George's Gallery. So coming back to the 1946 group exhibition and thinking about the names of men and the impact of that, the names of the men included in that exhibition of 1946 have helped rehabilitate Swansea, going back to Swansea's reputation in Ireland. And the screenshots here are from 2018 and coincide with the first major retrospective of the artist's work since 1968. And so you can see some of the narratives that are emerging: pioneer, unsung hero, leading. But in relation to Bondi Jaray, and what's happening here is that professionalization, that economic activity, participation in groups and exhibition practices are viewed as less important than connecting to the men. So sort of a brief background to Swansea, and I'll explain why in a minute. So Swansea was born in 1882, making her Bondi Jaray's junior by 2 years. She studied in Paris between 1905 and 1907, and she attended Académie Colarossi and Académie de la Grande Chaumière. And much of Swansea's early career was rooted in Paris, much like many of the women that I have talked about today. She first exhibited at the Salon des Indépendants in 1914 and exhibited at the Salon a further 17 times until 1938, which marked the last time she exhibited there. She also participated at the Salon des Beaux-Arts. She had a long-term arrangement with Chez Lefebvre-Fournet, a paint merchant, and she also had a solo show at Galerie Bernard-Jeune in October 1925. But she also regularly exhibited at the Royal Hibernian Academy in Dublin, had several solo shows in Dublin, exhibited with a variety of different societies in London, such as the National Portrait Society, the Society of Women Artists, the Women's International Art Club, and the London Group. The purpose of that list is not to enshrine Swansea as a wildly successful and unusual woman artist of the period, but actually to demonstrate that this is what a professional artist does. That someone who repeatedly uses exhibitions to feature and promote their work, someone who is embedded in different art scenes in different locations, London, Dublin, Paris. So if you were to break down, and if I was to go into detail and break down, the exhibiting practices to such level with Zaid, Krishna, Radulescu, you would see similar professional exhibiting behavior. And it is this exhibiting practice as professional behavior, however, that I think can offer insight into Bondi Jaray and the particular way that she might have helped support women artists. And to help us kind of think through that reality of exchanges and relationships between the artist and art dealer, the exhibition and the gallery, and indeed that potential relationship between Swansea and Bondi Jaray. Of course, any attempt to answer any of these questions requires us to kind of wonder, to speculate, and come up with questions that perhaps we can never truly know the full answers to. Some of the questions might be, how might these women have met? I honestly don't know. Where might they have met? Did they engage in written correspondence? What I do know is that Swansea returned to London from Ireland in 1945, and she was looking to re-establish her career post-war. And perhaps she was keen to support the London art scene. She was in her 60s at this stage. Although, given sort of Swansea's financial difficulties in the 1940s and the importance of St. George's Gallery in adding that reinvigorating element to the London art scene post-war, I really do think that the former is more likely, that Swansea is returning to London to sort of kickstart or re-kickstart her career in London. So more questions arise. Did Swansea solicit exhibition invitations from art dealers and galleries? Were her paintings seen elsewhere? Did she have established relationships with those in the London art scene? And looking through Swansea's correspondence at that archive in the National Gallery of Ireland, two things become evident. One, that she corresponded with literary and artistic figures in London, such as the writer Ethelrold Wheeler. And two, that she was a keen attendee of museums, galleries, and exhibitions, and often went with female friends. So in that archive, there are exhibition catalogues. Pablo Picasso is one of them, from the exhibition in the 1930s, I think. And then this slide here is a painting of a fellow artist and friend of Swansea's, Grace Henry. If any of you know Irish art, that name might be familiar to you. You might know her husband more, Paul Henry theme emerging there, who is known for his depictions of the west of Ireland. So much of Swansea's early career and her exhibiting practices highlight a reliance on the often invisible support networks of women. Her career is filled with connections and relationships with women. She studied under the Irish painter May Manning in the early 1900s, who encouraged her to study in Paris, and she continued to correspond with Manning until Manning's death in 1930. She had a great friendship with Sarah Purser, a renowned figure in the Irish art scene as patron and portrait painter, and Gertrude Stein's soirees at Rue de Fleureuse had a lasting impact as well. So what might this suggest of Bondi Jaray? Perhaps she was aware of the importance of women supporting other women, something that might start to kind of be viewed a little more tangibly looking at this list of women on the screen. Perhaps, and perhaps more likely, Bondi Jaray realized that emigres needed to support other emigres. You know, Swansea moved to London in 1926, but she continued to travel, spending months in France, Italy, and even going so far as Hawaii and American Samoa. Swansea spoke French, Italian, and German with ease. Perhaps Swansea and Bondi Jaray had friends in common, as they're both part of that international community post-war. And Swansea definitely knew of the importance of art dealers to the formation and continuation of an artist's career. But she didn't always like art dealers. And it appears that Swansea had negative experiences and distrusted art dealers as people who were invariably out to defraud artists. This stems from her own personal dislike of people who bought her paintings for onward sale, or people who bargained on price. So Swansea was a really shrewd businesswoman who kept a personal handwritten catalogue of all her paintings with prices, with and without the art dealer's cut or commission. So she had her paintings and 2 different prices. And this is absolutely fascinating because it prompts that thought again about the unwritten and often forgotten wheelings and dealings that happen behind the scenes. Regardless of how Swansea came to exhibit at St. George's Gallery, negotiations must have taken place. Did either of these women haggle? What was Bondi Jaray's cut? Was it individual, or did it go to the gallery and was therefore split between herself and Brill? After 1947, Swansea didn't have another solo exhibition for 20 years. So was this the bad experience? Did these 2 women disagree on dealer's commission, a particular sticking point for Swansea? According to Arnowitz and Isaac in 2019, Bondi Jaray had a reputation for being forceful, yet kind. Swansea was sharp, cutting, but quick to smile. Perhaps then this was a clash of 2 dominating women with forceful personalities. I don't really know. I think so. But it is fascinating to speculate, to generate new potential insights into how these women ran their careers, ran their businesses. What I do know is that Swansea's co-exhibitor in 1947, Mary Krishna, returned to exhibit at St. George's Gallery in 1949. And if you look on the screen, the names that I have in bold are the names of the women who returned to exhibit at St. George's Gallery. And we can only see a handful. There are 4. Again, questions arise. Did other people have bad experiences? Was this actually just the launching pad? And then St. George's Gallery became too small for them? I don't know. Did they return to their home countries by the end of the 1940s and no longer wish to exhibit in London? Were the prices too exorbitant to ship their artwork to London? My final point of the evening on sort of Bondi Jaray in the mirror of Swansea. You know, much has been discussed in art history about the divisions between public and private, male and female, social and domestic. What is private and domestic is rarely captured in lasting historical documents. What is known of Swansea's business conduct actually comes from a male art collector's memoirs published several decades after her passing. Only some of her written correspondence is preserved. How many letters did Swansea receive that no longer exist? Was a letter from Bondi Jaray amongst them? And what of Bondi Jaray's letters? Is there an archive to access? So much of this history is lost or damaged or inaccessible. Or, you know, maybe there was never any written correspondence. Perhaps these were conversations held in an exhibition space, just like this. Maybe it was all down to who you knew, the connections between spouses. So many of the women, they had sibling sons or partners who exhibited at the gallery before or after them. So those connections between spouses, children, friends, and colleagues. The exhibition was and still is fundamental to the career of the working professional artist, both as a social, so networking, and commercial space. The advent of modern art and modern art dealers in the early 20th century had shifted artists from self-organizing artistic networks and exhibitions to art dealers and collectors to a more privatized commercialism. So the gallery became a social and professional space, the workspace of artists and art dealers, art critics, and art collectors. It became a central, and still is a central focal point of the art scene and art market, and thus shapes modern art historical narratives and discourses. Yet, the gallery is often prioritized over the individual. So the public prioritized over the private, the visible over the invisible. What if Bondi Jaray and Swansea met in this shared work and social space of the exhibition of the gallery? What might they have discussed? Did they meet at a group show? Did they meet at the group show in 1946? And the ensuing conversation prompted Swansea's solo show a few months later. What I want to demonstrate here is that private nature of these meetings, that social essence that has not been and cannot be captured except perhaps fleetingly, and can really only be envisioned with that sort of or speculation and some imagination. So the importance of Bondi Jaray and St. George's Gallery in post-war London cannot be underestimated. For a short period of 5 years, the gallery distributed books and applied art, put on exhibitions, and became a central hub for social and promotional networking amongst emigre artists, particularly those who were German-speaking. Bondi Jaray was active in seeking support, active in her efforts to create momentum, actively collaborating, negotiating, building on those private encounters in the workspace of the gallery. And this drive resulted in some really important things. The receipt of a grant from the British Council in 1947 to organize an exhibition, which featured Lucian Freud, John Craxton, and William Scott. In March 1950, the year the gallery closed, Bondi Jaray held a group exhibition of Austrian expressionist painters, organized in collaboration with Albertina Museum and Österreich Gallery in Vienna and the Austrian Federal Ministry of Education. And this is what I have been able to pull together, the sort of exhibition chronicle. And looking at this chronology, it cannot be denied the breadth and depth of Bondi Jaray's collaborative abilities, and indeed her ability to negotiate, to invest time and money, to source financial and promotional support. This was a woman who understood keenly the value of the London art scene for transnational and emigre artists looking to re-enter the art scene. I'm just going to scooch forward just a little bit to come to the conclusion. So Bondi Jaray was able to create a space that supported the diversity of experience of emigre artists that showcased contemporary art that bore traces of their travel and exile. And this was also cleverly strategic, as the terrain of contemporary art was still under-recognized and underappreciated in London, meaning that there was little competition from local art dealers. St. George's Gallery therefore became a space where emigre artists could claim some legitimacy, where they could establish or re-establish themselves in the London art market, as with Mary Swansea, where continental European modernisms could be championed, where elsewhere it was still perceived with no small degree of skepticism. However, despite this, St. George's Gallery under Leah Bondi Jaray closed in 1950. It's not all roses. Many emigres struggled to continue their careers and survive financially in London, and they did so with great hardship. And Swansea was no different. She lived incredibly frugally for the rest of her life, like living in one room, living in her studio at the time of her death. So to conclude, in the end, I hope to have demonstrated by walking us through all these women and that really interesting network of connections, I hope to have demonstrated the importance of Bondi Jaray and St. George's Gallery to these women, and highlighted the often invisible economical and emotional support networks between working women artists, these women and Bondi Jaray, of happenings in the margins and private spaces that are really essential to the infrastructure of art dealership, commercial art, and the reality, the historical reality of women working artists in post-war London. Thank you. If you have any questions, if you want to, find any sources for anything, please feel free to contact me via the information on slide. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kai. That was tremendous, very rich, and lots of questions, but also lots of facts and histories. So I'm sure our audience are going to have some questions for you, and please do put them into the chat, everybody. While that's happening, perhaps we can just pick up a couple of those things. So one of them, the names that struck me particularly from your list there, was Katerina Wilczynski. Wilczynski is someone included in the Cosmopolis exhibition, and she interestingly kind of ties up a number of things that you have raised, because she was someone that was embedded in a number of communities. She obviously was working as a woman artist. She sort of did unofficial war art, recording scenes of bombing and that kind of thing, including of Greta Ring's bombed out premises of the branch of Caceres that she set up in Cleveland Row. And she also had relationships, personal friendships with lots of other dealers, like the Kaufmans, who housed her and Ring during the war, and William Oley, who's another gallerist in the show. So I just mentioned her as one example, like the many women that you discussed, who had all these many connections across and between. And another remarkable thing about so many of the dealers is how they knew each other and they supported each other, when you would think that they would often be in opposition, including sort of employing each other early on.
I know, and I was going to, I skipped that bit of sort of that lingering impact that she had due to time, that, she was able to support other dealers, and that former colleagues went on to found their own really significant
Fisher, I think, and
Erica Browson. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just was like, it's a really important point, but I just need to get to the conclusion. I don't want to. People's time is precious.
Indeed, and I see we have some interesting points coming in here. Andre Bondi says, I was the US point man in the Bondi family's effort to recover Wally. We settled out of court for a monetary sum. The painting went back to Austria. One of the conditions of settlement was that a placard describing the painting's history be displayed next to it in English and German. And this is described in the Andrew Scheer film cited in the talk. Thank you so much for that, Andre. That's absolutely fascinating.
And the film, you can, there's a website and you can watch it on Prime and 2 other locations. I can't quite remember, but the link is available.
Thank you. And Amy Brown asks whether you know of any other portraits, paintings, drawings, caricatures, etc., of Bondi besides the Shad.
So there is, I can scooch back a little bit. There is this one here on the right, which is an earlier painting by, is it Harta, from the 1920s, and this was exhibited at Galerie Royal in 1923. Apologies if I'm pronouncing things wrong. German is not my language. But yeah, this one on the right was exhibited, is painted 1923. But outside of those, no. For me, this is still very much like a really rich, in process research, that it's still stuff that I'm thinking through, hence the question.
Okay, I think Yona Yapu would like to make a comment. I don't know whether you could either type it, Yona, or my colleague Reka could perhaps unmute you to say that. We also have Alice Bondi, who comments that Leah Bondi Jaray was her great aunt.
And that it's Bondi and not Bondi.
Bondi.
Apologies. It's when I'm speaking, yeah.
It's very useful to have that. We do all say Bondi for some reason here, so it's very good to be corrected. Thank you. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to hear Yona or.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I see that someone is commenting on the way the name of this lady is pronounced. It was actually Bondi.
Yes.
There's also a well-known one in Israel who wrote about Czech jewelry called Bondi. And the second name is Jaray in the German pronunciation.
Yeah, right. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I also personally knew Katerina Wilczynski, who was quite a character. And had a studio over the underground near Church Street, and you could hear the trains rumbling underneath. And we have a few of their drawings.
Oh, fabulous.
And I'd love to talk to you more about that, Yona.
Sometime indeed, yes.
And I very much appreciate, I'll stop sharing now. I very much appreciate the comments on pronunciation, and absolutely going forward, I'll do better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to add any other comments before we bring the evening to a close? Otherwise, I'd just like to thank you again, Kai, for a wonderful talk. And I'd like to remind everybody to come and visit the exhibition, and that our talk next week will actually be at lunchtime, coming from Australia, with Dr. Jane Eckert on William Oley's Abbey Arts Centre. So thank you, Kai. Thank you to our audience, and good night to you all.